Hi, thanks for listening to the show today. We're going to meet today's guest soon, but I'm still excited about More Than Work. Host Rabia Kuhn, who is a marketing manager, stand-up comic, writer, and nonprofit volunteer, gets that we're not just defined by the work we're doing. All of our guests share how they've pursued new passions and hobbies and work that reflect their values. I hope you'll listen to More Than Work. I think you'll be inspired. I'll put the trailer to the show at the end of this episode. You can find More Than Work anywhere you listen to podcasts and at the website rabiasaid.com. Do you want to change the world? So do I. On this show, we meet artists whose work is doing just that. Welcome to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. Have you ever been dumped right before Valentine's Day? I have. Valentine's Day is right around the corner, and it's bringing up memories of failed relationships that I'd rather forget. One Valentine's Day in particular has been on my mind. I had recently left a long-term relationship. In fact, I was in the process of getting a divorce. Of course, I knew rationally that I wasn't ready for a new relationship, but I was out there looking anyway for what I would call one of those rebound Band-Aid relationships that would make me forget about the failed marriage. I had thrown myself into a few flings, but I think my desperation and barely glossed over heartache probably weren't the biggest turn-ons. For whatever reason, one of these flings wound up ghosting me about 2 days before Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day was already triggering. One of my fears was that I might never be in a loving relationship because I was just unlovable. But that year I thought, I am not going to stay at home. I will take myself out to dinner. I picked the least romantic restaurant I knew, a burger place that was more upscale than a McDonald's, but not by very much. My thought was, this will be a place where all of the other brave singles who are alone tonight will go because it is not romantic. Well, going out on Valentine's Day with the mindset I had that night, all I could see were couples in love. Even this cheap little burger place seemed like a haven of romance that night. I probably imagined that the lights were dimmed a little bit, but what I wasn't imagining was that they had changed all of their background music to love songs. And as I was standing in line to order, my all-time favorite love song came on. I wasn't going to let myself cry in this restaurant, but one question just kept repeating over and over in my head. Does everyone in this place think that I'm unlovable too? I got my burger to go and went home, where I ate it without even tasting it. When I look back on that night, do you know what I wish I had had? I wish I had had a copy of Rosie Wilby's book, The Breakup Monologues. This book would have shown me that I was definitely not alone in wondering what had gone wrong in my romantic connections. And even better, it would have helped me recognize the unexpected joy of heartbreak and the role these breakups play in unlocking possibilities and creative growth in our lives. Today, I'm talking with Rosie Wilby. Rosie is an award-winning comedian, author, and podcaster from the UK. She's appeared many times on the BBC Radio 4 programs Woman's Hour, Saturday Live, and Forethought. Her first book is Monogamy Dead, investigates the psychology of love and relationships. Her new book, The Breakup Monologues, The Unexpected Joy of Heartbreak, is based on her acclaimed podcast of the same name. If you like books that are personal, funny, poignant, and well-researched, this is a perfect Valentine's Day gift to get for yourself or a friend who's experiencing a broken heart. Reading this book just might help you savor the good things coming to you as you go through this transitional moment of your life. Before we meet Rosie, remember to follow Art Heals All Wounds on your favorite listening app, and if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating as well. Let me know what you liked by reaching out on social media or through my website, arthealsallwoundspodcast.com. Hi, Rosie. Thank you so much for being on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. Can you start by introducing yourself, telling us who you are and what you do?
Well, hello, and thank you for having me. I am a comedian, author, speaker, and podcaster based in London, and I particularly speak about the psychology of love and heartbreak, and I suppose how creativity can heal our heartbreak.
Yes, and I especially wanted to have you on to talk about your book, The Breakup Monologues, which I read and was, for me, an introduction to your work. But before we do, I want to congratulate you on your recent wedding.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yes, I married my wife, Suzanne, last year and in the summer. And that was great. That was amazing because I've really spent much of my life assuming that as a gay woman, I wouldn't be able to get married. So it's been an incredible journey. And also one where I've had to learn from my many breakups, as you'll hear if people listen to my podcast, The Breakup Monologues, or then read the book or listen to the audiobook version of that. They'll hear about that journey of learning from the roller coaster and the ups and downs, how to perhaps finally commit to somebody.
Yes, and I feel like even congratulating you on your wedding is almost like a spoiler for our conversation about your book called The Breakup Monologues. But the lovely thing about your book is that it is humorous and it's also incredibly well researched. There are a lot of nice little facts and study results of things around heartbreak, breakups, why we form the kind of attachments we do, why they're so hard to let go of. But the main thing about it is that it's very, very poignant. You talk about in the beginning the universality of heartbreak. And so many of your stories, it really is very much from your perspective as a gay woman. But I think I would defy anyone to read this book and not sort of have these cringy moments of like, oh, yes, I had a similar breakup or a similar relationship. So what was it like for you to go through and rehash these breakups and these relationships?
Well, I do think that we can learn from times that have been challenging, particularly when a bit of time has passed and we've had the opportunity to reflect either on our own or with the help of our friends and family, or perhaps even with a therapist or a professional who wants to help us process things and make sense of them. So the subtitle of my book is The Unexpected Joy of Heartbreak, because it really celebrates these experiences and how really what we think of as the painful and difficult experiences can actually be the making of us in the end, because they help us to develop resilience and grow and learn about ourselves and communicate better about what we want, who we want to be, and who we want to be with, and make better informed decisions as we move forward into more grown-up life. Or, you know, maybe we're grown-ups already, but we're always growing up, I think.
Right, right. Well, before we talk about your book more, would you be willing to read just a short excerpt of it?
Yes, I would, definitely. So this is from fairly early on in the book, from the prologue. And my wife, who we've mentioned, is called Girlfriend in the book because we're not married yet at the time of telling the story in the book. 3 months shy of our 3-year anniversary, Girlfriend and I have reached a refreshing level of frankness about the fact that our mutual desire has waned. We have teetered and toppled over the parapet of honeymoon bliss and fallen to the ground below, stirred from the anaesthetizing effects of the sexy brain chemicals that have propelled us along thus far with relative ease. Suddenly, we're acutely aware of the careers and friends that we have neglected during the happy haze. We have reached the point where being in a relationship with a fellow human has become a massive pain, even though it is a largely excellent relationship that neither of us intends to leave. Repeat, we're not going to break up, not for the foreseeable, not us. In fact, it's the first time I've reached this point and not been planning a daring, dramatic escape. Counting up the significant partners whom I probably would have married if it had been legally available to me all along, I'm now on to my 5th wife. That puts me on a multi-marriage par with Joan Collins. But I'm done with twisting. I think I'd like to stick. Surely if I left this one, I'd be breaking up with love altogether. It would be my end game. And it's from this position of at least wanting to stay, of accepting the maddening claustrophobia of companionship, that I want to investigate why breakups continue to compel me so much. Perhaps it is because breakups facilitate and maybe even necessitate transformation. In the wake of a separation, our peers allow us to reinvent ourselves. Renewed and reborn, standing at the edge of the echoing canyon of our former frustrations, we shout, "This is who I am now." And we run and skip away from the parched carcasses of the old selves that we have grown to hate. For me, it's been during these fleeting, liberating gaps of singledom that I've really got things done. I recorded and released an album. I launched a boutique music PR company. I started comedy. I wrote a book. Each time I harnessed any lingering feelings of anger, sadness, and confusion and used them as energizing forces for creativity, for moving forwards with new insights into my own shortcomings and foibles. I wonder if it is possible to do that much learning and actively stay in a relationship. I hope so. It must be, right? Or else all long-term couples would be codependent, emotionally stunted weirdos. Oh, hang on.
I love that passage that you just read. First of all, I just do have to comment. It really exemplifies your style that I love, like the parched carcasses, that we've come to hate, or what did you say?
Parched carcasses, the old selves we've grown to hate. I suppose it's, it's this idea that we're constantly reinventing and kind of shedding an old skin because we start to kind of feel that we need to move forwards. We maybe have been stuck in either in relationships we were no longer happy in, or jobs, or roles, or friendships, or just in a set of behaviors and patterns that we need to change and alter. So, for some people, they like to do things to alter their physical appearance, maybe a new haircut or a new wardrobe, new clothes. But for other people, it's more, an inner change, an inner transformation. But however we want to, show that, however we want to display that change and manifest it, I think it's an important part of our development and our journey through life. So, I think it's important that we do have those moments of reinvention. We might still want to celebrate some of the good bits about who we are and keep hold of those. But there's often bits that we want to go, oh, you know what? I don't like that bit of me, that bit of me that gets grumpy because of a certain thing in my past that I haven't dealt with.
Yeah. Well, the other reason I really love that passage is that it really lays out the central tension in this book, which is that you're going back through your past breakups, and then we'll come back to your relationship with girlfriend. When I read the book, you were not yet married to girlfriend, who's now your wife, but there is that little bit of tension, feeling like, oh no, I hope that this reflection on breaking up doesn't cause a breakup for this current relationship. But throughout the book, I feel like you did some amazing soul searching that we all should do. There's another section that I really love that I want to ask you about, the section about your love map. Do you remember that section where you're going back to when you were first in university, and you talk about sort of this, again, I'm just going to talk about some of the language because that's the part that's really humorous. You just have such a way with words that you were punching above your weight in your object of lust or something with, was her name Kate?
Yes, that's right. I talk about my first crush when I first went away to university as a 18, 19-year-old. And this woman, Kate, had a year out traveling around the world, so seemed much kind of wiser and to sort of be informed with this confidence that maybe the rest of us who were arriving there and leaving home and leaving school for the first time, we didn't possess that same sense of self that she seemed to have acquired by having this extra year doing exciting things in different countries. She definitely had a lot of admirers. It's only really after leaving university I found that there were so many. I bump into other people who went to the same place and were like, oh, you love Kate as well. Oh, okay.
That's so funny. She also, though, your description of her, she sounded really cute. She had Doc Martens.
Yes. I talk about the Doc Martens with a little tiny flower painted on the side.
And like the fancy, like a very unusual hairstyle.
Yeah, she had her hair kind of swept away from her dainty features in a weird kind of side ponytail, which came out the side of her head. So yeah, I do sort of still remember how she looked then and describe that. But yeah, I think those first unrequited loves are really, really interesting and do set a bit of a template and a pattern for our adult relationships later in life. And if we have had crushes on people who are unavailable, there's something quite compelling and thrilling about that because it stretches us and we think about, how can I be the kind of person that would get the attention of somebody like this? What would I need to do? How do I need to step my game up to be interesting and exciting and cool? And, how do I need to seem more assured and more like I know who I am and where I'm going? So I think it does actually accelerate your own sense of self and your own development if you have a crush on someone who you see to be in some way elevated or superior. Of course, ultimately you get to know these people and you realize that they don't know what they're doing either, but there's something about the way they've presented themselves in the world that makes you think that they do have some kind of extra or superior insight.
Right. But it's interesting because you talk about how for you, this crush on Kate really pushed you into this area of feminism. I can't remember what you say in the book. Were you out before you met Kate, or were you not yet out?
Not really. I was pretty closeted, but I became interested in politics and equality and identity because through having a crush on this woman, Kate, I became involved in a feminist zine, a newspaper that we were producing at the time with lots of articles about issues of the time and about, the sort of feminist and women's agenda, and thinking about childcare and equal pay and women's health and reproductive rights, and all these different kind of things that in many places around the world we're still talking about and thinking about. So yeah, it was really a great introduction to really thinking more about women and how women are treated around the world, and thinking about how we can have a voice about changing things. And actually, a lot of things have changed a great deal. And in particular, obviously, we were also thinking about the LGBTQ agenda, which I think has maybe come on a lot further, a lot more quickly than the women's agenda, because we did things like on Valentine's Day, we staged a mock same-sex wedding where 2 women and 2 men got married. And one of the women was Kate, in fact, who was marrying her girlfriend. But she was actually surrounded by heartbroken, sad people who were all secretly in love with Kate, who were not looking very cheery at this pretend wedding that we were putting on. Even though it wasn't a real wedding, we were also thinking, oh, why isn't it me? So it was quite a strange little event. But yeah, we were kind of shouting through megaphones. We were standing in the snow. It was a snowy day and we were all freezing, shivering, but we were shouting, love is not a crime, and thinking that this was something science fiction that we just wouldn't see in our lifetimes, that we would see 2 women being able to get married. And of course, now I am married. So it's been an interesting journey.
Right, right. Well, there are so many things that come up from what you just said. There is one line that I noted down because I just thought it was so profound. You said that that's when you fell in love with the idea of being in love with someone utterly unavailable. And I think that that is an amazing thing for someone to realize about themselves, and is so helpful in this kind of experiment of studying breakups and trying to stay in a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it makes it hard to stay with someone who is available to you, because you've become so attached to the notion of someone being distant and being unavailable, and that seemed so sexy and so alluring. You've got to then acclimatize to something completely different to that, to your earliest experience of real deep lust and love and attraction. You've got to reprogram yourself, and that is really hard. But like I say, I think this crush on Kate was incredibly intellectually rewarding and creatively rewarding, because it set me on this path of writing and thinking and creating and doing things that were outside of the degree I was studying at the time, which actually wasn't that interesting to me and wasn't what I ended up doing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think this is just so useful, and so many people could relate to that. I know that I can, this idea of being in love with someone utterly unavailable. And you go through, and it really is true that in every way in these relationships, there was some significant way that that person was not available to you. But I want to talk about the idea of serial monogamy that you talk about a lot, because I have to honestly say that up until about 10 years ago, I did not know that serial monogamy was considered not a positive idea about someone. I think that I would have probably been a serial monogamist, except I was dating men. And there are probably few more men like wanting to just rush into a commitment. But this idea that you're with someone who's not right for you, but you're just trying so hard to hold on, and it's not working. And the worst part is that reading your book and thinking, just comparing with my own notes, is that like, really, for your examples you're looking at, you should have been the one walking away long before. And I think is a hard lesson for a lot of us to learn.
It's definitely, I mean, particularly with one relationship, which I sort of joke was the catalyst for writing and thinking about breakups so much when I got dumped by email. And I joked at the time I felt much better after correcting her spelling. But then I go into more detail about the fact that the relationship was incredibly challenging to me because she was not open about the fact that we were a couple due to her own internalized homophobia and her family not accepting the situation and stuff. That was not a situation which I had ever thought would be acceptable for me because I've always been pretty open. And I had really, right from the word go, said this was not something I wanted, because I wanted to have a relationship where we could be out and open. And I guess you just stay and you think someone's going to change. They're going to come out. You're going to support them. You're going to help them find the strength and find the words and find the inner courage and find the self-love to be able to be authentic and be themselves. And yeah, I definitely stayed longer in a situation that wasn't a happy one for me. And that meant that I started being not a nice partner for her either. We were both kind of at loggerheads about that situation because neither of us had what we needed or wanted at that time. So yeah,
Right.
we do sometimes stay too long. But yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because I also believe that relationships take work and we need to accept that. And sometimes we need to knuckle down and do the work. And so it's finding that balance of thinking, is this person, really committed to also doing the work, and have we got somewhere we still need to go together? But, even though I'm married, I don't necessarily think we should always assume that relationships are going to last forever. I think you have to have an open mind, because sometimes it is the right thing. It is the healthy thing to separate.
Right.
And as I've said in the book, that can be the beginning of a new chapter. In fact, that's the reason that I wrote the first half of the book in a backwards timeline and the second half of the book in a forwards timeline, to demonstrate this idea that the ending of one chapter is always the beginning of another.
Right. But I think that that's what's so interesting about your book, is to separate out what is just bad holding on and what is the work that actually has to be done, and the right expectations that your partner that you're going to be with is not going to be all things to you, and they're not going to fulfill every single need you have, because how could they? But do you think that it's just like a spectrum, or do you think it's just two completely different things, where someone who is really truly not a good relationship for you, and then someone who it is a good relationship for you, even though of course things are not always perfect? Is that a spectrum, or is it just two different things that you wind up with?
I think it's a spectrum, but I think also we're not thinking about our own place and energy in the world at the time that we are inhabiting this relationship ourselves, because that has a huge impact on determining the success or failure of the relationship as well. So if we arrive into a relationship at a good, positive moment in our lives, when we're ready and open to a relationship, I think that colors the relationship in a completely different way than it does if we arrive in a relationship when we've been sort of desperately scouring dating websites, hating the thought of being on our own. We're not accepting ourselves and loving ourselves. We might arrive at a relationship in a difficult place, in a heartbroken place. Perhaps we're still not over our previous relationship, which is certainly a position I have been in once or twice. And we haven't processed the things we need to process. And so that will color the relationship in a way, even if maybe you're with someone who is pretty good for you on paper, but the energy, the dynamic that gets set up isn't maybe the right one or the healthy one. But I think once you're set in a particular dynamic, in a power dynamic or in certain roles, it can be quite tricky to alter those unless you're both really on the same page. with a real commitment to do that. Sometimes you have a relationship dynamic that one person is unhappy with and one person is really happy with. So that's tricky.
I have one other thing that I really want to ask you about, and that is in your book, you're very fair in your book in that you give viewpoints that are not aligned with yours necessarily at all, maybe, but you talk about, I just want to see if I can get this right. So you put these two ideas out from a philosopher, Lucy O'Brien.
Oh, yeah.
That a comedian's invitation to others to laugh at them is a strange act of self-harm. Is the result a zero-sum game if the teller of the joke is also the butt of it? And then you talk about Hannah Gadsby asks what self-deprecating humor means when it comes from somebody who already exists in the margins. But I'm curious, you are a comedian and you do use humor. You do tell your personal story. What's your take on the use of humor for your life and for figuring out memories and experiences that were painful?
Yes, I think perhaps like many comedians or writers who use humor and comedy, had a real journey in terms of how I think we use humor. I still think humor is a wonderful tool for making tricky topics like monogamy, infidelity, breakups, heartbreak really accessible to a broad audience. Audiences come along to see live recordings of my podcast, I think, because they feel that we're going to have a laugh about heartbreak, not in a mean way, but in a very generous, open and fair-minded way, I hope. And so I often see people in the audience nodding along and thinking, oh God, yes, I've had a breakup like that. I also ran out naked into the street to chase after my partner, when they were leaving, and lay down in the road in front of their car. God, yeah, I did that. So, I think it's this wonderful tool for breaking down that topic, that if we were going to have a really scientific or dry discussion about what is actually going on in the brain when we're brokenhearted, it might not feel as immediately helpful to someone who is just feeling lousy because their love of their life, or the person they assumed to be the love of their life, has just disappeared, and they're withdrawing from a drug effectively, because we become addicted to the people that we spend all this time with and all this time thinking about. So
Right.
It's this wonderful tool for bridging that gap, really, between what we need to hear and how we can process it, but also giving us the important information that we can go away and think about more. But yes, you're right. When we are standing on stage, particularly at the clubs on a Friday night, Saturday night, late night clubs, and the audience have been drinking, there's a tendency for comedians, I think maybe particularly comedians from the margins, female comedians, older comedians, to make fun of ourselves. And there is something about who your comedy persona, what your comedy voice is, and whether you are actually doing yourself down a bit. And I've had to really think a lot about this, and I think my voice is changing slightly, and it's partly why I have become a bit more choosy about the environments that I perform in, and tried to practice self-care and not put myself in perhaps the most bear pity of comedy clubs anymore. As I've got older, I've tended towards a slightly more hybrid career where I'm now at literary festivals and podcasting festivals, philosophy conferences, and I still do stand-up gigs. I still do the comedy circuit, but perhaps not some of the same venues where I used to go, 10 years ago. I mean, maybe I should. There's an argument that, you've still got to get out there and be, an older comic, a female comic, an openly gay comic in front of audiences who might not always agree with what you've got to say, because perhaps then you're making them think. But then there's an element of self-care, and it's really walking that tightrope and finding that balance, I think, and feeling like you can be authentic and not actually be scared for your own physical safety, which has sometimes been a worry.
Right, exactly. Well, I do think, just speaking personally, the comedians that I enjoy the most are the ones where you're listening to them, you're thinking like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm glad you're making me laugh about it. You know, I do feel like they're the comedians who invite you to laugh with them as opposed to laugh at them. I don't know. I think it is a good idea to be a little bit pickier about who your audience is going to be and where it's going to happen. You're giving them the gift of laughing about heartache as well, and being able to see that there's a lot of growth that comes out of it, and it wasn't just a miserable failure in their life. I think that's really wonderful. Well, I would love to talk to you all day, but I won't keep you because I know it's a little bit later there than it is here. But can you tell people where they can find both your book and the rest of your work?
Well, yes, thank you. It's been so lovely to chat to you this evening here in the UK. It's, as you say, a bit earlier in the day there. And people can find me if they'd like to on Twitter at Rosie Wilby, on Instagram at Breakup Monologues. The book, The Breakup Monologues, The Unexpected Joy of Heartbreak, is available at all good bookshops. You should be able to order it at your local indie bookstore, or obviously it's available from all the usual places online, Amazon, bookshop.org, etc. So you should be able to find it. And it is also an audio book narrated by me. So you should be able to listen. If you enjoyed hearing me reading that extract earlier on, you should be able to find me reading that. And also the Breakup Monologues podcast is available on all the podcast platforms as well, Apple, Spotify, and so on. So I'd love to hear from people if they, want to find out more about me, and I'm pretty approachable on social media, and I have a website. There's not a lot of information there. It's really just a landing page for all the other social media platforms and to go and find the book and find the podcast, but that is rosiewilby.com.
Well, thank you so much. It was so fun to finally get a chance and talk with you. I have really enjoyed your book. It's taken me down memory lane, but in a less painful way than maybe I would have gone had I just gone there on my own. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad you enjoyed it.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm so grateful to Rosie Wilby for being on the show to talk about her book, The Breakup Monologues, The Unexpected Joy of Heartbreak. I read this book twice. Once really quickly because it's such an engaging read, then a second time more slowly, just to savor all the insight that Rosie shares from her personal experiences and her research for this book. It's published by Bloomsbury, and you can find it in hardback, paperback, or Kindle. You can also check out Rosie's podcast, The Breakup Monologues. I'll include her social media handles and other info in the show notes. I also want to thank you for listening to this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. If you don't already, please follow us in your favorite listening app and share us with a friend. All of this helps me bring more amazing artists to share their work and their stories on the show. The music you've heard in this podcast is by Ketsa and Lobo Loco. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. Art Heals All Wounds comes to you from Oakland, California, on unceded territory of the Choqueño Ohlone people.
Hello, I'm Robbie Akun, the host of More Than Work podcast. I'm also the marketing manager for an IT development company, a stand-up comedian, a nonprofit volunteer, and sometimes an activist. But enough about me, let's talk about More Than Work. It's an interview-style show that brings listeners stories of people who have found a way to pursue their passions outside of work or as part of what they do. Having faced burnout a few times myself, and realizing my self-worth had become intertwined with my work, I decided to expand what I did outside of my job. I observed the burnout and loss of confidence with my friends and always tried to help. If you are facing or have ever faced the same, or just like hearing other stories, More Than Work is for you. My chats with guests uncover how they are living lives that allow their self-worth to be more than just their job titles. You can listen and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever you get podcasts. It's not a series, so just pick a guest that sounds interesting and enjoy. Again, I'm Rabia. Thanks for giving me the time to tell you about More Than Work.